In 1992, a mother and her 9-year-old son disappeared during a scenic coastal road trip in Oregon, leaving behind a grieving father and a trail that went cold within days. But 26 years later, a construction crew demolishing an abandoned rest stop makes a discovery that changes everything. What they find hidden behind a false wall will unravel a nightmare that began with a simple wrong turn and ended in a place no one should ever have to imagine. If you enjoy deep-dive true crime mysteries that explore the darkest corners of human nature, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next. The photograph sat on David Hartley's desk in the same silver frame it had occupied for 26 years. Elena smiled into the camera, her auburn hair catching the summer sunlight. One arm wrapped around 9-year-old Ben, whose gap-toothed grin showed his missing front tooth. Behind them stretched the Oregon coastline, all rocky cliffs and endless blue. David had taken that photo 3 days before they vanished. He picked up the frame now, as he did every morning, studying their faces for some detail he might have missed, some clue hidden in Elena's smile or Ben's bright eyes. The photo had been taken at Cannon Beach, their first stop on what was supposed to be a week-long road trip down the Pacific Coast Highway. Elena had wanted to show Ben the sea stacks and tide pools, to teach him about starfish and anemones. They never made it to their second destination. On August 14th, 1992, Elena and Ben left the Seascape Motel in Lincoln City at approximately 9 a.m., heading south on Highway 101. They were supposed to call David that evening from their next hotel in Florence. The call never came. By the third day, police had found their rental car abandoned in a pull-off near Cape Perpetua. Keys in the ignition, Elena's purse still on the passenger seat. No signs of struggle, no blood, no witnesses. It was as if they had simply stepped out of the vehicle and walked into the forest, never to return. The investigation consumed months, then years. Search teams combed the forests and beaches. Divers explored the treacherous waters. Volunteers distributed flyers across 3 states, but Elena and Ben had vanished as completely as morning fog burning off the coast. David never remarried. He kept their house exactly as Elena had left it, Ben's room still decorated with dinosaur posters and model airplanes. Every August 14th, he placed a missing persons ad in newspapers along the Oregon coast, a ritual of hope that had long since calcified into habit. He was 62 now, his hair gone silver, his hands marked with age spots. Ben would be 35 if he were still alive. Elena would be 58. David set the photograph back in its place and turned to his computer, where an email notification blinked on his screen. The subject line made his breath catch. Elena and Ben Hartley case. Urgent. He clicked it open with trembling fingers. Mr. Hartley, this is Detective Sarah Kovach with the Oregon State Police. We've just received information regarding your wife and son's disappearance. Please call me at your earliest convenience. There's been a development. David stared at the words, his heart hammering against his ribs. In 26 years, he had received countless false leads, well-meaning psychics, cruel hoaxes. But something about the formal tone, the official email address, the careful phrasing made this feel different. He reached for his phone. Detective Sarah Kovach stood in what remained of the Whispering Pines rest area, a derelict way station that had been closed to the public since 2003. The building was scheduled for demolition, part of a highway modernization project that would replace the crumbling structure with a sleek, solar-powered facility. The construction crew had stopped work 3 hours ago. Sarah pulled her jacket tighter against the coastal wind that whipped through the partially demolished building. Beside her, the foreman, a man named Tom Breslin, looked pale despite his weathered complexion. We thought it was just a weird architectural feature at first, Tom explained, gesturing toward the women's restroom. You know, like maybe they built a closet and then walled it over. But when Martinez broke through with the sledgehammer, he saw the scratches. Sarah followed him into the restroom, stepping carefully around broken tiles and exposed rebar. The acrid smell of old concrete dust filled her nostrils. 3 other officers were already documenting the scene, their camera flashes illuminating the dim interior. The false wall had been erected in what should have been a supply closet. Someone had built it with professional care, matching the concrete blocks and even applying a thin layer of plaster to blend with the existing structure. To a casual observers, it would have appeared to be nothing more than a shallow alcove. But behind that wall was a space roughly 8 feet by 6 feet. Sarah ducked through the opening that Tom's crew had created. Her flashlight beam swept across the confined space, and her stomach tightened at what she saw. Deep scratches covered the interior walls, some forming words, others just frantic gouges in the concrete. A child's backpack sat in one corner, faded and mildewed. Beside it lay what appeared to be a woman's cardigan, navy blue, now stained and deteriorating. "Nobody touch anything," Sarah said quietly, though her team already knew better. "We need forensics here immediately." She crouched near the backpack, careful not to disturb it. Through the open zipper, she could see a crumbling coloring book, the images barely visible after decades of moisture damage. A small plastic dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus Rex, had fallen beside the bag. Sarah's mind went to the case file she had reviewed just last week, one of dozens of cold cases she'd been assigned when she transferred to the Oregon State Police. Elena Hartley, age 32, and Ben Hartley, age 9, missing since August 1992. Last seen in this general area. She stood and examined the scratches more closely. Most were illegible, desperate marks made with fingernails or perhaps a small stone. But near the back corner, someone had managed to carve deeper letters into the concrete. Elena H. Ben H. 1992. Below that, in smaller, shakier letters, "Help us." Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her chest. 26 years. They had been here, trapped behind this wall, while thousands of travelers stopped at this rest area, using the restrooms, buying snacks from vending machines, completely unaware of the horror concealed behind a false wall just feet away. "Detective?" One of the crime scene techs, a young woman named Ramirez, approached with an evidence bag. "We found this near the cardigan." Sarah took the bag and examined its contents. A driver's license, surprisingly well preserved in a small plastic sleeve. The photo showed a woman with auburn hair and kind eyes. The name read, Elena Marie Hartley. "Get me everything," Sarah said, her voice tight. "Every fiber, every print, every possible trace. I want to know exactly what happened here." As her team began the meticulous work of processing the scene, Sarah stepped back outside and pulled out her phone. She had already sent the email to David Hartley, but now she needed to call him. This wasn't the kind of news anyone should receive without a human voice to deliver it. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Hartley, this is Detective Kovach. Thank you for responding so quickly. You found something." His voice was steady, but she could hear the undercurrent of hope and fear that she recognized from countless similar conversations. "We found evidence that we believe is connected to your wife and son's disappearance. I need you to understand that this is still an active investigation, and we're in the very early stages of processing what we've discovered." "Are they alive?" The question came quickly, desperately. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. This was always the worst part. "Mr. Hartley, we found personal items that belong to your wife and son in a concealed space at an abandoned rest stop near Cape Perpetua. We haven't yet recovered any remains, but given the circumstances and the length of time that's passed, we need to prepare for all possibilities." The silence on the other end stretched for several long seconds. "Which rest stop?" His voice had gone hollow. "Whispering Pines. It was closed in 2003 and has been abandoned since then. We're scheduled to demolish it, which is how the space was discovered." "I know that place." David's breathing had become audible. "We stopped there, the day before they disappeared. Elena took Ben to use the restroom while I got coffee from the vending machine. Sarah's grip on her phone tightened. Mr. Hartley, I'm going to need you to come to our offices in Salem. There are some questions I need to ask you, and you may be able to help us identify some of the items we've found. I can be there tomorrow morning. That would be helpful. In the meantime, I want you to try to remember everything you can about that stop at Whispering Pines. Who you saw there, what vehicles were in the parking lot, any interactions your wife or son might have had. Anything at all, no matter how insignificant it might seem. After she ended the call, Sarah returned to the concealed space. Ramirez was photographing the scratched messages on the walls, documenting each desperate mark. How long do you think they survived in here? Ramirez asked quietly. Sarah shook her head. I don't know. We'll need to have the medical examiner look at everything. She paused, studying the space. But someone went to a lot of trouble to keep them here. This wall was professionally built. The room is ventilated. See those small holes near the ceiling? This was planned. You think someone was keeping them alive deliberately? I think someone created a prison, Sarah replied. The question is why, and what happened to them after. As afternoon faded into evening, the forensics team continued their painstaking work. They found more evidence: a child's sneaker, size 3, a water bottle with a flip-top lid, fast food wrappers from chains that had existed in the early 90s, and something else that made Sarah's blood run cold: a medical kit containing syringes and several empty prescription bottles. The labels on the bottles had degraded, but the pharmacy name was still partially visible: Lincoln City Pharmacy. Sarah made a note to check prescription records from 1992, though she knew it was a long shot. Most pharmacies didn't keep records that far back, and digital databases hadn't been universal in the early 90s. As darkness fell, portable lights illuminated the rest stop, casting harsh shadows across the demolition site. Sarah stood outside, watching her team work, her mind already assembling the pieces of what must have happened here. A mother and son, stopping at a rest area on a coastal highway, someone watching, waiting, somehow luring or forcing them into that hidden space, keeping them there, trapped behind a wall while the world went on outside, oblivious. The how was becoming clearer. The why and the who remained buried in 26 years of silence. But Sarah intended to unearth every secret this place held, no matter how dark, no matter how deeply buried. The dead, she had learned long ago, always found a way to speak. You just had to know how to listen. David Hartley arrived at the Oregon State Police headquarters in Salem at precisely 8 o'clock the next morning. He had driven through the night from his home in Portland, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but replay that day in 1992 over and over in his mind. Detective Kovacs met him in the lobby, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and professionally distant. She led him to a small conference room where files and photographs were spread across a table. I appreciate you coming so quickly, Mr. Hartley. Can I get you some coffee? No, thank you. David's eyes were already fixed on the evidence bags arranged on the table. He could see Ben's dinosaur through the clear plastic, still bright green despite the passage of time. Is that his T-Rex? Sarah nodded. We'll need you to formally identify the items, but yes, we believe so. David reached out, then stopped himself. Can I? Not yet. Forensics still needs to process everything. But I wanted you to see what we found. She gestured to a chair. Please, sit. David lowered himself into the chair, his eyes never leaving the small dinosaur. Ben had won it at a carnival 3 weeks before the trip. He'd insisted on bringing it along, tucking it into his backpack with his coloring books and crayons. Tell me about the day before they disappeared, Sarah said gently, opening a notebook. You said you stopped at Whispering Pines rest area. David forced his attention away from the evidence. It was around 2 in the afternoon. We'd been driving for a few hours. Elena wanted to stop, let Ben stretch his legs. I pulled into the rest area, parked near the building. Do you remember anything unusual? Anyone else there? David closed his eyes, trying to visualize that afternoon. There was a van, white or light gray, commercial-looking with some kind of logo on the side. I remember thinking it was a plumber or electrician, something like that, and there was a sedan, dark blue or black. An older couple was walking their dog near the picnic tables. Did you see anyone go into the restroom when your wife and son did? No, I stayed by the car. I got a coffee from the vending machine outside. He opened his eyes. I should have gone with them. I should have. Mr. Hartley, Sarah interrupted gently. You had no way of knowing. This wasn't a random attack. Whoever did this planned it carefully. David looked at her sharply. What do you mean? Sarah hesitated, then decided he deserved to know. The space where we found these items was a purpose-built prison. Someone constructed a false wall, installed ventilation, made it virtually invisible. This took planning, skill, and access to the building. You think it was someone who worked there? Possibly. We're pulling employment records from the highway department, contractors who worked on the building, anyone who might have had access. She paused. We're also looking at similar cases from that time period. This level of planning suggests we might not be dealing with a first-time offender. David felt his stomach turn. How long do you think they were in there? Sarah's expression softened. We don't know yet. The medical evidence we found suggests they may have survived for some time. We found water bottles, food wrappers. But Mr. Hartley, I need to prepare you for the possibility that we may not find them alive. I know. David's voice was barely a whisper. I've known for a long time, but not knowing, that's been the worst part. Every day for 26 years, wondering if they were out there somewhere, if they were suffering, if they were calling for me and I couldn't hear them. He broke off, pressing his palms against his eyes. Sarah waited quietly, letting him compose himself. I need to know what happened to them, David said finally. All of it, no matter how terrible. We'll find the truth, Sarah promised. I need to ask you about the prescription bottles we found. Do you know if Elena or Ben were taking any medications in 1992? David shook his head. Ben had allergies, but nothing that required prescription medication. Elena was healthy. She took vitamins, that's all. Sarah made a note. We're having the bottles analyzed. If they contained sedatives or other drugs, it might help us understand how they were controlled. The word controlled hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. There's something else, Sarah continued. We found messages scratched into the walls. Your wife's handwriting, we believe. Based on samples from her personal papers, she wrote your name, David. Multiple times. David's chest tightened. Can I see them? Sarah pulled out a folder containing photographs of the wall scratches. She spread them across the table, and David leaned forward, his hands trembling. David, find us! David, we love you! David, please! The letters were uneven, desperate, some barely legible. He could imagine Elena in that dark space, using her fingernails or a stone to carve these messages, holding on to hope that somehow they would be found. She never stopped believing I'd come for them, David said, his voice breaking. You did everything you could, Sarah said firmly. You kept their case active. You never stopped looking. That persistence is why we're here now, why we finally have a chance to find out what happened. David studied the photographs, trying to control the wave of grief and rage that threatened to overwhelm him. Then something in one of the images caught his attention. Wait, he pointed to a scratch mark in the lower corner of one photo. Can you enlarge this? Sarah pulled out her laptop and brought up the digital file, zooming in on the area David had indicated. As the image expanded, they could both see what he'd noticed. Beneath the other scratches was a series of numbers, carefully carved despite the crude tools available. 1-800-555-0147. That's a phone number, David said. Sarah was already typing, running the number through various databases. It's disconnected now, But let me check historical records. She made several calls, her expression growing more focused with each conversation. Finally, she hung up and looked at David with barely contained excitement. That number belonged to a payphone. It was located at the Whispering Pines rest area in 1992. David stared at her. Why would Elena write down the number of a payphone at the rest area where they were being held? I don't think she did, Sarah said slowly, her mind racing. I think someone else wrote that number. Someone who wanted to communicate with whoever put them in that room. The implications settled over them both. You're saying there was more than one person involved, David said. I'm saying this was more complex than a single attacker. Someone built that room, someone held them there, and possibly someone else was involved in whatever happened next. Sarah pulled out her phone. We need to find out who had access to that rest area, who worked there, who might have had keys. She made a call to her team, issuing rapid instructions. When she hung up, she turned back to David. Mr. Hartley, I need you to think carefully. In the days leading up to their disappearance, did Elena or Ben mention anything unusual? Anyone following them? Any strange interactions? David forced himself to think past the emotion, to remember those last days with the clarity they deserved. Elena mentioned something the night before they disappeared. We were on the phone. She called from the hotel. She said a man at the ice machine had made her uncomfortable. Uncomfortable how? She said he stared at Ben. Just stood there with his ice bucket staring. When she asked if he needed help, he apologized and walked away. She said something about him felt off. Sarah was already writing. Did she describe him? Tall, she said. Thin. Wearing a maintenance uniform or something similar. She thought he might work at the hotel. David's hands clenched into fists. I told her she was being paranoid. I laughed it off. You had no way of knowing, Sarah repeated. We're going to pull records from that hotel, get guest lists, employee records from that time period. If he was staying there or working there, we'll find him. As they continued talking, going over every detail David could remember, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. What is it? David asked. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes grave. My team just found something else at the rest stop. They were searching the area around the building, expanding the perimeter. She paused. They found disturbed earth about 50 yards into the woods behind the facility. Ground-penetrating radar is showing something buried there. David's breath caught. You think it's them? I think we're about to get some answers, Sarah said carefully. The excavation team is already on site. With your permission, I'd like you to provide DNA samples that we can use for comparison when we find remains. Yes, of course. Anything you need. Sarah called in a technician to collect the samples, and David submitted to the quick, painless process in a daze. When it was done, he sat back down, staring at the evidence bags on the table. How long until you know? He asked. If the remains are there, a few hours to excavate. DNA analysis could take days or weeks, depending on the condition of the evidence. Sarah studied him. Is there someone who can be with you? Family? A friend? David shook his head. I'll be fine. I've been alone for 26 years. A few more days won't make a difference. But they both knew that was a lie. These next few days, these next few hours, would make all the difference in the world. Somewhere in the woods behind an abandoned rest stop, the truth waited to be unearthed. And David Hartley, after more than 2 decades of not knowing, was finally going to learn what had happened to his family, whether he was ready for that truth or not. The excavation site was cordoned off with yellow tape that snapped and fluttered in the coastal wind. David stood at the perimeter, watching as forensic anthropologists worked in a carefully measured grid, removing earth one careful layer at a time. Detective Kovac had advised him to wait at the police station, but David had insisted on being here. After 26 years of absence, he needed to be present for whatever came next. The afternoon sun filtered through the coastal pines, creating dappled shadows across the disturbed earth. Dr. Patricia Chen, the lead forensic anthropologist, worked with methodical precision, using brushes and small tools to expose what the ground-penetrating radar had detected. Sarah stood beside David, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with various departments. When she ended the call, she turned to him. The hotel where Elena and Ben stayed the night before they disappeared was called the Tidewater Inn. It was sold in 1998 and converted into condominiums. But I've got officers tracking down the original owner and employee records. David nodded, his eyes never leaving the excavation site. The man Elena saw, the one who stared at Ben. You think he's connected? I think your wife's instincts were telling her something was wrong. We need to find out who that man was. A shout from the excavation site made them both turn. Dr. Chen was signaling to her team, her movements suddenly more urgent. Sarah immediately headed toward the perimeter tape, and David followed. "What did you find?" Sarah called out. Dr. Chen looked up, her expression difficult to read behind her protective mask. "Detective, you need to see this." Sarah ducked under the tape and approached the excavation grid. David remained at the boundary, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He watched as Sarah crouched beside Dr. Chen, examining whatever they had uncovered. The conversation was too quiet for him to hear, but he could see Sarah's posture stiffen, could see her hand move to her mouth. When she returned to him, her face was pale. "Mr. Hartley, we've found skeletal remains. Female, approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, consistent with your wife's description." David's knees weakened, and Sarah gripped his arm to steady him. "Are you certain it's her? We'll need DNA confirmation, but the location, the time frame, everything points to it being Elena." She paused. "There's something else. She was buried with another set of remains. Male, juvenile, approximately 9 years old." The world seemed to tilt. David had known logically that they were likely dead. He'd known it for years. But hearing it confirmed, knowing they were here in this dark forest all along while he searched and hoped and grieved. "I need to sit down," he managed to say. Sarah guided him to a folding chair near one of the forensic vans. Someone brought him water, which he sipped mechanically, his hands trembling so badly that liquid sloshed over the rim. "The preliminary examination shows trauma to both skulls," Sarah said quietly, sitting beside him. "This wasn't natural death, Mr. Hartley. We're treating this as a double homicide." "How long were they in that room?" David asked, his voice hollow. "Before they were killed?" "We don't know yet. Dr. Chen will examine the remains more thoroughly, and we'll analyze everything we found in the concealed space. Insect evidence, decomposition markers, everything that can give us a timeline." David stared at the forest floor, seeing nothing. "They were so close. All those searches, all those volunteers combing the beaches and highways. They were right here, less than a mile from where we found their car." "The person who did this knew how to hide evidence," Sarah said. "They knew how to make people disappear. This wasn't opportunistic. This was calculated." A crime scene technician approached, holding an evidence bag. "Detective, we found this with the remains." Sarah took the bag and examined its contents. Inside was a tarnished necklace, a simple silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a lighthouse. "Do you recognize this?" She showed it to David. His breath caught. "I gave that to Elena for our 10th anniversary. She never took it off." Sarah nodded grimly and handed the evidence bag back to the technician. "Tag it and get it processed." She turned back to David. "We're going to catch whoever did this, I promise you that." 26 years, David said. "Will there even be enough evidence left?" "You'd be surprised what remains can tell us. And we have more than just bones. We have the room they were held in, the materials used to construct it, the items they left behind. Every choice their killer made left traces." As the afternoon wore on, more remains were carefully excavated and documented. David watched from his chair, unable to look away. needing to witness this final act, even though every moment was agony. Dr. Chen approached them around 4 o'clock, pulling off her gloves. She was a small woman in her 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that had seen too much death to be shocked by it anymore. "Detective Kovac, Mr. Hartley," she said, her voice professionally gentle. "I've completed the preliminary field examination. With your permission, I'd like to share what we've found so far." David nodded mutely. Dr. Chen consulted her tablet. Both victims show evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with a heavy object like a hammer or pipe. The injuries would have been fatal or near fatal. Based on the position of the remains and the lack of defensive wounds on the hand bones, I believe the attacks were sudden, possibly while they were sleeping or incapacitated. "Incapacitated how?" Sarah asked. "That's speculation at this point, but given the prescription bottles you found in the concealed room, sedation is a possibility. We'll test for trace evidence of drugs in the bone marrow and teeth, though after 26 years the results may be inconclusive." "What about time since death?" Sarah pressed. "The degree of decomposition in the insect evidence suggests the remains have been here for decades, consistent with your 1992 timeline. I'll be able to narrow it down more precisely once I examine the remains in the lab." Dr. Chen paused, her expression troubled. "There's one more thing. The juvenile remains show signs of long-term malnutrition and possible vitamin D deficiency." David looked up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means he was kept in darkness, deprived of sunlight for an extended period before death. The changes to the bone structure take months to develop, possibly longer." The implication hung in the air like poison. Ben had been kept in that dark room behind the false wall for months, trapped, frightened, slowly deteriorating while the world outside went on, oblivious. David stood abruptly and walked away from the excavation site, needing distance, needing air. He made it about 50 yards before his legs gave out, and he sank to his knees in the pine needles, a howl of grief ripping from his throat that echoed through the forest. Sarah followed but kept her distance, letting him release the anguish that had been building for more than 2 decades. When his sobs finally subsided to ragged breathing, she approached and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," David managed. "I thought I was prepared for this." "No one is ever prepared for this," Sarah said. "Take all the time you need." They stood there in the forest as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Behind them, the forensic team continued their meticulous work, documenting every detail, collecting every fragment of evidence that might lead them to the person responsible. Finally, David straightened and wiped his face. "What happens now? We process everything. We follow every lead. We find out who had access to that rest stop, who had the skills to build that room, who had the opportunity to take Elena and Ben." Sarah's voice hardened. "And we make them answer for what they did." As they walked back to the excavation site, David's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it absently, then stopped walking. Sarah noticed immediately. "What is it?" David showed her the message. It was from an unknown number, just 4 words that made his blood run cold. "I know what happened." Sarah immediately grabbed his phone, her mind racing. "When did this come in?" "Just now." David stared at the words. "Who would send this?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out." Sarah was already signaling to her technical team. "We'll trace the number, see if we can identify the sender." But even as she issued instructions, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone out there knew about Elena and Ben's fate. Someone who had stayed silent for 26 years was now choosing to reach out. The question was why. And what else did they know? The message had come from a burner phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in Tillamook, 70 miles north of the excavation site. The store's security footage showed a figure in a hooded jacket and sunglasses, face carefully obscured, buying the phone and activating it at the self-service kiosk. Sarah watched the grainy footage for the 5th time, looking for anything distinctive. The person's height, build, gait, all deliberately neutral. Impossible to determine even gender with certainty. They knew how to avoid identification, Officer Marcus Webb observed, leaning over her shoulder in the conference room. That's not amateur behavior. Sarah nodded grimly. The question is whether this is our killer taunting us, or someone else who knows what happened. Since the text message, there had been no further communication. David's phone sat on the conference table, surrounded by recording equipment, waiting for another message that hadn't come. David himself sat across from Sarah, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past 24 hours. He'd refused to go home, instead staying in a hotel near the police station, as if proximity might somehow speed up the investigation. "We've made some progress on the hotel lead," Sarah said, pulling up a file on her laptop. The Tidewater Inn employed 12 people in August 1992. Most of them were part-time housekeeping or front desk staff, but there was a maintenance supervisor named Gregory Voss. She turned the laptop to show David a scanned employment photo. The man in the picture was in his mid-30s, tall and thin with dark hair and a weak chin. He wore the kind of generic maintenance uniform that could belong to any hotel or service company. "Do you recognize him?" Sarah asked. David studied the photo carefully, then shook his head. "I never saw him, but Elena might have. She's the one who mentioned the man at the ice machine." Voss left the Tidewater Inn in September 1992, just a few weeks after Elena and Ben disappeared. His employment record shows he moved to a hotel in Coos Bay, worked there for 6 months, then disappeared from the employment system entirely. "You think he's our suspect?" "I think he's a person of interest who needs to be found and questioned." Sarah pulled up another document. "But there's more. Voss had a brother, Nathan Voss, who worked for the Oregon Department of Transportation in 1992. His maintenance route included the Whispering Pines rest area." David's eyes widened. "So one brother worked at the hotel where Elena reported seeing someone suspicious, and the other brother had access to the rest stop where they were held." "It gets better," Officer Webb interjected. "Nathan Voss had training in basic construction and plumbing. His job description included minor repairs to rest stop facilities, including installation of walls and fixtures." Sarah opened another file. "We pulled Nathan's work orders from 1992. In July of that year, he submitted a request for materials to repair water damage and replace wall sections in the Whispering Pines women's restroom." "The false wall," David said, understanding flooding through him. He built it as part of his official job. And no one questioned it because it was in his paperwork, approved and documented. He could come and go freely, work on it over several days or weeks, and it would just look like routine maintenance. David leaned back in his chair, his mind working through the implications. 2 brothers. One identifies potential victims, the other prepares the holding location. They were working together. "That's our working theory," Sarah confirmed. "But we need to find them to prove it." Nathan Voss left his ODOT job in January 1993. His last known address was in Newport, but that was 25 years ago. "What about Gregory?" "We're still tracking him. He's even more of a ghost. No tax records, no employment history, no social media presence. Either he's living completely off the grid, or he's dead," David finished. Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression changed. "We've got a hit on Nathan Voss. A traffic camera caught his vehicle near Astoria 2 days ago." She pulled up the image. A dark green pickup truck, older model, with a license plate that traced back to Nathan Voss, now age 68, with a current address in rural Clatsop County. "How fast can we get there?" David asked, already standing. "Mr. Hartley, you can't come with us. This is police business." "That's my wife and son in the ground back there. I'm coming." Sarah studied him for a long moment, then made a decision that was probably against protocol. "You stay in the car. You don't approach the property. You don't interfere. Understood? Understood. 40 minutes later, they were heading north on Highway 101, a convoy of 3 police vehicles cutting through the afternoon traffic. David rode with Sarah, silent and tense, watching the coastline flash past. Nathan Voss's address led them to a dilapidated property 20 miles inland from Astoria, accessed by a rutted dirt road that wound through dense forest. The house was a small single-story structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The dark green pickup truck sat in the driveway. "He's here," Officer Webb confirmed through the radio. Sarah parked well back from the property, positioning David's vehicle behind the tactical team. "Stay here," she instructed. "We'll approach on foot." David watched as 6 officers moved toward the house, weapons drawn, calling out for Nathan Voss to show himself. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then the front door opened, and a man emerged with his hands raised. He was elderly, stooped with wispy white hair and watery blue eyes. He looked nothing like the maintenance worker from the employment photo, but 26 years could change a person dramatically. The officers moved in quickly, securing him and reading him his rights. David watched, his hands clenched into fists, as they led Nathan Voss to a patrol car. Sarah returned to the vehicle. "We've got him. He's not resisting. Says he wants to talk." "Did he confess?" "Not yet, but he asked if we found them behind the rest stop. He knew where they were buried, Mr. Hartley." David felt a surge of rage so intense it left him dizzy. "Let me talk to him." "That's not going to happen, but I will ask your questions." "What do you want to know?" David thought for a moment. "Ask him why. Why them? Why my family?" Sarah nodded and returned to the patrol car where Nathan Voss sat in the back seat. Through the window, David could see her speaking to him, could see the old man's lips moving in response. When she came back, her face was pale. "He says it wasn't supposed to be them specifically. He says they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time." Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger. "He claims his brother Gregory was the one who chose them, that he just helped because Gregory threatened him." "Do you believe him?" "I believe he's trying to minimize his involvement. But he's willing to talk, and that's what matters right now. We need to find Gregory, and Nathan says he knows where he is." They transported Nathan Voss to the county jail in Astoria, where he was processed and placed in an interrogation room. Sarah insisted David observe from behind the one-way glass, keeping him separated from the investigation but allowing him to hear what Nathan had to say. Nathan sat hunched in his chair, his hands trembling as he accepted a cup of water from Officer Webb. He looked like someone's harmless grandfather, not a man who had helped imprison and murder a woman and child. Sarah entered the room and sat across from him, placing a recorder on the table between them. "Mr. Voss, you've waived your right to an attorney. Is that correct? I don't need a lawyer. I want to tell you what happened. I've been carrying this for too long." "Then let's start at the beginning. How did you and your brother Gregory first encounter Elena and Ben Hartley?" Nathan took a shaky breath. "Gregory worked at the Tidewater Inn. He'd been watching them since they checked in. Said the woman was pretty, and the boy reminded him of someone from his past. He called me that night, said he had a plan." "What was the plan?" "To take them. To keep them for a while. Gregory had these ideas, see, about having a family of his own. He'd been married once, but his wife left him and took their son. He never got over it. When he saw that woman and her boy, something in him snapped." David listened from behind the glass, his fingernails digging into his palms. This monster had stolen his family because of some twisted fantasy of replacement. "Tell me about the room at Whispering Pines," Sarah prompted. "I built it," Nathan admitted. "Gregory insisted. He said we needed a safe place to keep them until they adjusted, until they learned to accept him as family. I told him it was crazy, but he threatened to tell the police I'd been stealing from ODOT. I was scared, so I did what he asked." "You built a prison to hold a woman and child captive, and you expect us to believe you were just following orders?" Nathan's eyes filled with tears. I know how it sounds. I know what I did was evil. But Gregory was my brother, and I was weak. God forgive me. I was weak. What happened the day Elena and Ben disappeared? Nathan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Gregory was waiting at the rest stop. He'd put up a maintenance sign, made it look official. When the woman and boy went into the restroom, he was already inside, dressed in an ODOT uniform. He told them there was a gas leak, that they needed to evacuate immediately through the back exit. But there was no back exit, Sarah said. No, the back exit led to the room I'd built. Once they were inside, Gregory locked them in. They screamed and pounded on the walls, but the room was soundproofed. No one could hear them. David felt bile rise in his throat. Elena and Ben, trapped just feet away from people who could have saved them, but unable to make themselves heard. How long did you keep them there? Sarah's voice was cold, professional. Months. Gregory would go there at night when the rest stop was closed, bring them food and water. He tried to make the boy call him Dad, tried to make the woman act like his wife. But they wouldn't. They kept fighting, kept trying to escape. So he killed them. Nathan nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. He said they'd never accept him, that they were too broken to be his family. One night he went there with a pipe. I didn't know what he was planning until it was too late. When I got there the next morning, they were both dead. And you helped him dispose of the bodies? Yes. The word came out as a broken sob. God help me. Yes, we buried them in the woods after dark. Gregory said we had to, that if we were caught, we'd spend the rest of our lives in prison. Where is Gregory now, Mr. Voss? Nathan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. That's the thing, Detective. Gregory's been dead for 12 years. Heart attack. He died without ever answering for what he did. But you didn't, Sarah said quietly. You lived with this knowledge for 26 years. Why reach out now? Nathan wiped his face with shaking hands. I saw the news about the rest stop being demolished, about the room being found. I knew it was all going to come out. And I thought about that father, the one who lost his wife and son. I thought about him wondering all these years, and I couldn't let him keep wondering. I had to tell someone. I had to make it stop. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Nathan Voss, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessory to murder. You'll be formally charged tomorrow morning. I know, Nathan said quietly. I've known this day was coming for a long time. In a way, it's a relief. Sarah left the interrogation room and found David in the observation area. His face was wet with tears, his expression a mixture of grief and rage, and something that might have been relief. You heard everything? She asked. I heard. David's voice was rough. Gregory Voss is dead. We'll verify it, pull death records. If Nathan's telling the truth, we can at least close the case, even if one of the perpetrators is beyond justice. David nodded slowly. Elena and Ben fought. They never gave up, never accepted what he was trying to make them into. That's something, I suppose. It's more than something, Sarah said. It means they never stopped being your family, never stopped believing you'd find them. And you did, Mr. Hartley. After 26 years, you finally found them. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as Nathan Voss was led from the interrogation room to a holding cell. What happens now? David asked. Now we verify his story, document everything, and build a case for prosecution. Nathan Voss will spend whatever time he has left in prison. It's not enough, not nearly enough for what he did, but it's something. David looked out the window at the darkening sky. I can bring them home now. I can finally bring them home. And for the first time in 26 years, David Hartley knew where his family was, knew what had happened to them, knew that the men responsible would answer for their crimes. It wasn't the ending he'd hoped for all those years ago, but it was, finally, an ending. The verification of Nathan Voss's confession began immediately. While he sat in his holding cell, Sarah's team worked through the night, pulling records, cross-referencing dates, and building a timeline that would either confirm or contradict his story. Gregory Voss's death certificate was located in Multnomah County records. He had died on March 15, 2006, at age 49, of acute myocardial infarction. The death had been investigated by the county medical examiner and ruled natural causes. He'd been cremated 3 days later, his ashes scattered by his brother Nathan. "Convenient," Officer Webb muttered, reviewing the file. "No body means no way to verify if the death was really natural." Sarah nodded. She was thinking the same thing. "Pull the full medical examiner's report. I want to know who signed off on the cause of death and whether there was any indication of foul play." While Webb worked on that, Sarah turned her attention to employment records. Gregory Voss's work history after leaving the Tidewater Inn was sporadic and troubling. 6 months at a hotel in Coos Bay, 3 months at a motel in Grants Pass, brief stints at various establishments along the coast. Each job ended abruptly, often with no explanation in the records. "He was moving around a lot," Sarah observed. "Classic pattern for someone evading attention. Or someone who kept doing things that got him fired," Webb added. "We should check if there were any complaints filed against him at these locations." Sarah assigned 2 officers to that task, then turned to the most crucial question. Were there other victims? She pulled up missing persons reports from Oregon and neighboring states between 1990 and 2006, filtering for cases involving women and children who disappeared near coastal highways. The results made her stomach turn. 14 cases matched the basic parameters. 14 families who had vanished or been found dead under suspicious circumstances within 200 miles of locations where Gregory Voss had worked. "Dear God," she whispered. David appeared in the doorway of the conference room, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the station's break room. Despite Sarah's insistence that he go home and rest, he'd refused to leave, instead making himself useful in small ways while the investigation proceeded. "You should see this," Sarah said, gesturing him over. David set down the coffee cups and studied the map Sarah had created, with pins marking each missing persons case and red dots showing Gregory Voss's employment locations. The correlation was impossible to ignore. "You think they're all connected?" David's voice was hollow. "I don't know, but we need to investigate each one. If Gregory and Nathan were responsible for more than just Elena and Ben." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. David sank into a chair, staring at the map. "How many?" 14 possibles. Some were solved, some remain open. But the pattern is there. Sarah pulled up one file. This one is particularly troubling. September 1993, Brookings. A mother and daughter disappeared from a motel. Their car was found abandoned at a scenic overlook. They were never found. Where was Gregory Voss in September 1993? Sarah checked her timeline. Working at the Brookings Harbor Inn, he quit 2 weeks after the disappearance. They worked through each case methodically. Not all of them fit perfectly. Some of the victims were men, some were elderly, some disappeared in circumstances that seemed unrelated to the Voss brothers' methods. But at least 6 cases showed striking similarities to Elena and Ben's disappearance. "We need to search Nathan's property," Sarah said. "If there are more victims, there might be evidence there." She arranged for a search warrant, and by dawn, a forensic team was combing through Nathan Voss's ramshackle house and property. David watched from a distance as they worked, his coffee growing cold in his hands. Around noon, one of the technicians called out. They'd found something in the crawl space beneath the house. Sarah pulled on protective gear and descended into the cramped, dark space. Her flashlight beam swept across the dirt floor, landing on a wooden box tucked against the foundation. The box was old, its wood warped with moisture, but it had been carefully positioned and covered with a tarp. "Get the camera down here," Sarah called up. They photographed the box from every angle before carefully removing it. Sarah waited until they were back in the daylight to open it, conscious of David watching from behind the police tape. Inside the box were trophies, dozens of them, driver's licenses, photographs, jewelry, children's toys, articles of clothing, each item carefully wrapped and labeled with a date. Sarah's hands trembled as she examined a small pink hair ribbon dated September 1993, matching the Brookings case, a man's watch from 1995, a woman's bracelet from 1998. On and on, a catalog of stolen lives. Nathan said Gregory acted alone after Elena and Ben. Sarah said quietly to Webb, "He lied." They brought Nathan back to the interrogation room. This time, Sarah didn't ask permission before entering. She slammed the box of trophies on the table between them with enough force to make Nathan flinch. "You want to try again?" she demanded. "You want to tell me the truth about what you and your brother did?" Nathan stared at the box, his face draining of color. "Where did you find that?" "In your crawl space, where you've been keeping it for decades. These are from other victims, aren't they?" Nathan's silence was answer enough. "How many?" Sarah pressed. "How many people did you and Gregory kill?" "I didn't kill anyone," Nathan said weakly. "Gregory did the killing. I just helped him hide the evidence afterward." "That makes you an accessory to murder for every single one of these cases. You're looking at multiple life sentences, Mr. Voss. Your only chance at any mercy is to tell us everything. Right now." Nathan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was a resignation there that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "There were 8, he said quietly. 8 families over 13 years. Sarah felt the room tilt slightly. Families. Multiple victims each time. Gregory liked pairs. Mother and child, father and son, once even 2 sisters traveling together. He said it was more satisfying that way, that breaking one person required another person to witness it. Nathan's voice was flat, emotionless, as if he were recounting something that had happened to someone else. "And you helped him, every single time. He was my brother. I was afraid of him, but he was still my brother. Family is supposed to protect each other." "Family," Sarah repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. "You talk about family while you helped murder 8 families. Do you have any idea what you've done? The lives you've destroyed?" "I know." Nathan looked down at his hands. "I've known for 26 years. Every day I wake up knowing what I am. Do you think that's been easy? Do you think I've had a single peaceful night's sleep since this started?" "I don't care about your peace of mind," Sarah said coldly. "I care about the families who deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. You're going to give me every detail, every victim, every location, every burial site. You're going to help us bring them all home." For the next 6 hours, Nathan talked. He provided dates, locations, descriptions of victims. The team cross-referenced his information with missing persons databases, and one by one, the cases began to match. David sat in the observation room through all of it, forcing himself to listen. These other families had suffered the same nightmare he had, the same endless wondering, the same desperate hope that gradually calcified into grief. When Sarah finally emerged from the interrogation room, she looked exhausted. "We have enough to locate at least 6 more burial sites," she told David. "Teams are already being assembled to begin recovery operations." "The text message," David said suddenly. "The one that said, 'I know what happened.' That wasn't Nathan, was it?" Sarah shook her head. "He didn't send it. He doesn't even own a cell phone, according to his records. Someone else knows about this. Who? I don't know. But they knew about the discovery at the rest stop, and they knew to contact you specifically. That suggests someone with inside information, someone close to the case." They were interrupted by Officer Webb, who looked troubled. "Detective, we've got a problem. The medical examiner who signed off on Gregory Voss's death certificate, Dr. Martin Reeves. He was arrested in 2008 for falsifying autopsy reports. Served 3 years for evidence tampering." Sarah and David exchanged glances. "So Gregory's death might not have been natural after all," Sarah said. "There's more. Webb continued. Dr. Reeves was released from prison in 2011. He currently lives in Seaside, and guess who visited him last week, according to the sign-in log at his apartment building? Who? Sarah demanded. Someone who gave the name G. Voss and claimed to be family. The implications settled over them like a cold fog. Gregory Voss was supposed to be dead, cremated, his ashes scattered. But if the death certificate was falsified, if the medical examiner was corrupt... We need to find Dr. Reeves, Sarah said. Right now. They assembled a team and drove to Seaside, arriving at Dr. Reeves' apartment complex just before sunset. The building manager let them in after seeing their badges, directing them to apartment 3B on the 3rd floor. Sarah knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Dr. Reeves, this is the Oregon State Police. We need to speak with you. Still nothing. Sarah nodded to Officer Webb, who used the manager's master key to unlock the door. The apartment was dark, stuffy, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and old takeout food. They moved through it carefully, clearing each room. They found Dr. Reeves in his bedroom. He was sitting in a chair by the window, his head slumped forward, a bullet hole in his right temple. A handgun lay on the floor beside him. On the desk in front of him was a laptop, still open, its screen glowing in the dimness. Sarah approached carefully, pulling on gloves before examining it. An email draft was open, unsent, addressed to David Hartley. The timestamp showed it had been composed 3 days ago. Sarah read it aloud. Mr. Hartley, I am writing to confess my part in concealing the truth about Gregory Voss. In 2006, I falsified his death certificate in exchange for $50,000. Gregory Voss did not die of natural causes. He is still alive. I don't know where he is, but I know he's still out there. I thought you deserved to know. I'm sorry for what I've done. I'm sorry for all of it. David stared at the screen, his face pale. Gregory Voss is alive? Sarah's mind was racing. If Gregory was alive, if he'd been alive all this time, then everything Nathan had told them was either a lie or only part of the truth. And if Gregory was still out there. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the forensic team still processing Nathan Voss's property. Kovac, she answered. Detective, you need to get back here right now. We found something else in the crawl space. There's a trap door leading to a sub-basement we didn't know existed. And, detective, the technician's voice was shaking. There's someone down there, someone alive. The drive back to Nathan Voss's property took 45 minutes, but it felt like hours. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Someone alive in a sub-basement beneath Nathan's house. Someone who had been there the whole time while they searched, questioned, investigated. David sat rigid in the passenger seat, his knuckles white where he gripped the door handle. Neither of them spoke during the drive. When they arrived, the property was ablaze with portable lights, the forensic team working in organized chaos. The lead technician, a woman named Dr. Lisa Park, met them at the crawl space entrance. We found the trap door hidden under old boards and dirt, she explained, her voice tight. It leads down about 8 feet to what looks like a converted root cellar. There's a woman down there, late 60s, possibly early 70s. She's conscious but non-responsive. Paramedics are preparing to extract her now. How long has she been down there? Sarah asked. We don't know yet. But detective, the space is set up like a long-term holding cell. There's a cot, supplies, a chemical toilet. Someone's been keeping her alive. Sarah descended into the crawl space, then down through the trap door into the sub-basement. The space was larger than she'd expected, roughly 12 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a single battery-powered lantern providing dim light. The woman sat on the cot, staring at nothing. She was emaciated, her gray hair matted and unkempt, her skin pale from lack of sunlight. She wore a stained nightgown and was wrapped in a dirty blanket. Ma'am, Sarah said gently, approaching slowly. My name is Detective Kovac. You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." The woman didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge Sarah's presence. Her eyes were vacant, fixed on some point in the middle distance. A paramedic climbed down into the space and began a preliminary examination. "Severe malnutrition, dehydration, possible psychological trauma," she reported. "We need to get her to a hospital immediately." They extracted her carefully, lifting her through the trap door and into the waiting ambulance. Sarah followed, watching as the paramedics started an IV and checked her vital signs. "Can she speak?" Sarah asked. "She hasn't said a word," the paramedic replied. "But physically, there's no reason she couldn't. This seems psychological." David had stayed back during the extraction, but now he approached the ambulance, looking at the woman with a mixture of pity and confusion. "Do you know who she is?" he asked Sarah. "Not yet. We'll run her fingerprints, check missing persons databases. But David, if she's been in Nathan's basement all this time, and Gregory is still alive out there somewhere." "There could be others," David finished. "Other people still being held." Sarah's phone rang. It was Officer Webb, calling from the station where Nathan Voss was still being held. "Detective, we showed Nathan a photo of the woman we found. He identified her immediately. Says her name is Patricia Voss. She's Gregory's ex-wife." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "Gregory's ex-wife? The one Nathan said left him and took their son?" "The same. According to Nathan, Gregory tracked her down in 1998 and kidnapped her. He's been keeping her prisoner for 20 years. And Nathan knew about this the entire time. He says Gregory threatened to kill Patricia if Nathan didn't help him. Says he was protecting her. By keeping her locked in a basement for 2 decades? Sarah's voice was sharp with anger. "What about her son? The child she supposedly took when she left Gregory." There was a pause. "Nathan says the son died in a car accident in 1995. That's what sent Gregory over the edge. Made him start tracking Patricia down. He blamed her for taking his son, then getting him killed." Sarah closed her eyes, processing this new information. The pattern was becoming clearer now, darker, more twisted than she'd initially understood. Gregory Voss hadn't just been killing families. He'd been trying to build his own, taking captives and forcing them into roles they never asked for. When they didn't comply, when they couldn't become the family he wanted, he killed them, except for Patricia. Patricia he'd kept alive, punishing her endlessly for the crime of leaving him and for the death of their son. "We need to find Gregory," Sarah said. "Right now. He knows we've discovered everything. He's going to run, or worse, he's going to strike again." She turned to David. "I need you to go to the hospital with Patricia. The doctors will want a medical history, any information that might help them treat her. And there's a chance she might try to communicate. If she does, I need to know immediately." David nodded. "What about you?" "I'm going to find Gregory Voss and end this." While David accompanied Patricia to the hospital, Sarah returned to the station and pulled Nathan from his cell one final time. He shuffled into the interrogation room, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Where would Gregory go?" Sarah demanded without preamble. "If he knew we were closing in, where would he run?" "I don't know," Nathan said. "We haven't spoken in months. After I saw the news about the rest stop, I tried calling him, but he wouldn't answer. That's when I knew he'd disappeared." "You must have some idea. Properties he owns, friends he might contact, places he talked about." Nathan thought for a long moment. "There's a cabin near Nehalem Bay. Our father left it to both of us when he died. Gregory used to go there sometimes when he needed to think. It's remote, off the grid. No electricity, no running water." "Give me the exact location." Nathan provided coordinates and detailed directions. Sarah immediately dispatched units to the area while she and a tactical team prepared to move in. The cabin was 3 hours north, deep in the coastal forest. They approached on foot as darkness fell, moving through the trees with tactical precision. The structure was small, maybe 600 square feet, with boarded windows and a chimney that showed no signs of recent smoke. Sarah signaled her team to take positions. 2 officers moved to the back entrance while she and Officer Webb approached the front door. "Gregory Voss, this is the Oregon State Police," Sarah called out. "The building is surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Silence answered her. She tried again, her voice echoing through the forest. Still nothing. Webb used a battering ram on the door, which splintered inward easily. They entered with weapons drawn, clearing each room methodically. The cabin was empty, but it had been occupied recently. Food wrappers on the counter, a sleeping bag on the floor, ashes in the fireplace that were still warm to the touch. "He was here," Webb said. "Recently, maybe within the last few hours." Sarah examined the space more carefully. On a small table near the window, she found a map of Oregon with several locations circled in red marker. Most of them corresponded to places where Gregory had worked, where victims had disappeared. But one location, circled multiple times and marked with a star, was in Portland. The address meant nothing to Sarah initially, but when she ran it through her database, her blood ran cold. It was David Hartley's home address. She grabbed her phone and dialed David's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "David, it's Sarah. Do not go home. Gregory Voss has your address. I repeat, do not go home. Call me immediately." She tried again. Voicemail. "Get me a unit to the hospital," Sarah ordered Webb. "Now, and I need every available officer converging on David Hartley's residence in Portland." They ran back to their vehicles, Sarah's mind racing. David had gone to the hospital with Patricia Voss. He should be safe there, surrounded by people, security cameras, hospital staff. But if Gregory had been watching them, if he knew David was part of the investigation. Her phone rang. It was a nurse from the hospital. "Detective Kovach, this is Sacred Heart Hospital. We're calling about Patricia Voss. She's started speaking." "What did she say?" "She keeps repeating the same thing. He's going to kill the man who found us. He's going to kill David." Sarah's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. "Where is David Hartley right now?" "He left about 20 minutes ago. Said he needed to go home and rest, that he'd come back in the morning." Sarah swore and ended the call, immediately trying David's number again. Still no answer. Traffic was heavy heading into Portland, and every minute felt like an eternity. Sarah coordinated with local police, who confirmed they were en route to David's address. When they finally arrived at David's modest house in northeast Portland, she saw his car in the driveway, the front door standing slightly ajar. "Approach with caution," Sarah instructed her team. "Voss is armed and extremely dangerous." They moved toward the house, weapons ready. Sarah reached the front door first and pushed it open fully. "David," she called out. "David, are you here?" A sound from deeper in the house. Movement or struggle. Sarah moved through the living room, past the photograph of Elena and Ben still in its silver frame, toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. She found David in what appeared to be Ben's old room, the one he'd kept exactly as his son had left it. He was on his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back. Standing behind him, a gun pressed to the back of David's head, was a man Sarah recognized from the old employment photos. Gregory Voss looked older now, in his late 60s, but his eyes held the same cold calculation visible even in those decades-old pictures. He was thin, almost skeletal, with wispy gray hair and a weak chin. He wore dark clothing and latex gloves. "Detective Kovach," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Right on time. I was hoping you'd make it for the finale." Sarah kept her weapon trained on him. "Let him go, Gregory. It's over. We found Nathan. We found Patricia. We know everything." "Do you?" Gregory smiled, and there was nothing human in the expression. "Do you really know everything? Did Nathan tell you about the ones we let go? The families we released after a few months, traumatized but alive. Too scared to ever report what happened to them? Sarah felt her stomach drop. How many? Does it matter? They're out there living their lives, carrying our secrets. Some of them probably have children of their own by now, maybe even grandchildren. All of them knowing that if they ever speak up, we'll come back for them. Nathan's in custody, Sarah said. He's confessed to everything. There's no we anymore. It's just you, and you're not walking out of here. I don't intend to, Gregory replied. But neither is Mr. Hartley here. You see, he's the one who started all this. If he hadn't kept searching, hadn't kept pushing, hadn't kept that case in the public eye year after year, we'd have been fine. But no, he had to be the devoted husband, the grieving father, the man who never gave up. You took his family, Sarah said. What did you expect him to do? I expected him to move on, to accept it, to fade away like all the other survivors did. Gregory pressed the gun harder against David's head, making him wince. But he couldn't let it go, and now he gets to join them. If you pull that trigger, you die, Sarah said. My team has you surrounded. There's no escape. I know. Gregory's smile widened. I've been dead since the day my son died. This is just making it official. David's eyes met Sarah's, and she saw the resignation there. He'd spent 26 years searching for his family, and now he was about to join them. But Sarah had made him a promise. She'd promised to catch whoever did this, to bring them to justice, and she kept her promises. You want to know the real reason you kept killing? Sarah said, her voice sharp, cutting. It wasn't about your son. It wasn't about Patricia. It was because you're weak. You're a coward who could only feel powerful by hurting people who couldn't fight back. Gregory's expression darkened. Shut up. Your son would be ashamed of you. Patricia left you because she saw what you really were. And every family you took, every person you hurt, it just proved that you were exactly the pathetic failure she always knew you were. I said shut up. Gregory's hand moved, the gun swinging away from David's head toward Sarah. It was the opening she needed. Sarah fired twice, both shots catching Gregory's center mass. He staggered backward, his gun falling from his hand as he collapsed against Ben's bookshelf, sliding to the floor. Officers rushed into the room, securing the weapon and calling for paramedics. Sarah moved to David, cutting his zip ties and helping him to his feet. Are you hurt? She asked. David shook his head, unable to speak, his whole body trembling with adrenaline. Gregory Voss lay on the floor, blood spreading across his chest. His breathing was shallow, labored. Sarah knelt beside him. How many others? She demanded. How many families did you let go? Gregory's lips curved into one final smile. You'll never know, he whispered. They'll never tell, and they'll spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, wondering if today is the day I come back. His eyes went vacant, the smile freezing on his face as his last breath rattled out. Sarah stood, looking down at the man who had caused so much suffering, who had stolen so many lives and destroyed so many families. It was over. Gregory Voss was dead. Nathan was in custody. The families would finally have answers. But Gregory's final words echoed in her mind. How many others were out there, survivors who had never reported what happened to them, living in fear that their captors might return? That was a question that might never be answered. The weeks following Gregory Voss's death were consumed by the grim work of recovery and documentation. Sarah's team excavated 6 burial sites based on Nathan's information, finding the remains of 14 victims spanning 13 years. Each discovery brought closure to a family that had spent years wondering, searching, hoping against hope. David attended every notification, sitting quietly in the corner while Sarah delivered the news to fathers, mothers, siblings, children who had grown up without answers. He recognized their expressions, their grief, their terrible relief at finally knowing. He'd worn that same expression when Sarah told him about Elena and Ben. Patricia Voss remained hospitalized, her physical recovery progressing faster than her psychological healing. The years of captivity had damaged her profoundly, leaving her with severe PTSD and dissociative episodes. But gradually, with therapy and medication, she began to speak about her ordeal. Sarah visited her regularly, gathering details that helped fill in the gaps in the case. Patricia sat in her hospital room, gazing out the window at the world she'd been separated from for 20 years, her voice flat and emotionless as she recounted her nightmare. Gregory never accepted the divorce, Patricia explained during one session. Even after the papers were finalized, even after I moved 3 states away and changed my name, he kept finding me, kept calling, kept showing up at my work. I finally got a restraining order in 1994. "What happened to your son?" Sarah asked gently. Patricia's hands tightened on the bed sheet. "Michael. His name was Michael. He was 17 when he died. A drunk driver hit him while he was walking home from basketball practice." Her voice cracked. "Gregory blamed me. Said if I hadn't taken Michael away from him, if we'd still been a family, Michael would have been safe at home instead of walking alone. That wasn't your fault. I know that now, but Gregory convinced himself it was. He started stalking me more intensely after Michael died. I moved to Seattle, changed my name again. I thought I'd finally escaped." Patricia closed her eyes. "Then one night in 1998, I left work and someone grabbed me from behind. When I woke up, I was in that basement. 20 years. Sarah said quietly, 'You survived 20 years in captivity.' I don't know if survived is the right word. I existed. Gregory would come down every few days with food and water. He'd talk to me like we were still married, like nothing had changed. He'd tell me about the families he took, about how he was building his own version of what we'd had. When they didn't work out, when they fought too much or tried to escape, he'd kill them and start over." "Did he ever tell you where he buried them?" Patricia nodded. "He kept a journal, detailed records of every family, every location. He used to read it to me like bedtime stories. I think he's hidden it somewhere Nathan wouldn't have found it, somewhere only Gregory knew about." Sarah leaned forward. "Do you have any idea where that might be?" "He mentioned a storage unit once. Said he kept his important things there, things Nathan wasn't allowed to see." Patricia frowned, concentrating. "He said it was near where it all began. I think he meant near the Tidewater Inn, where he worked when he took his first family." Sarah immediately dispatched officers to search for storage facilities near the Tidewater Inn's former location. Within hours, they'd identified 3 possibilities. The third facility's records showed a unit rented under the name M. Voss, Michael Voss, Gregory's dead son. The storage unit was small, climate-controlled, and had been paid for years in advance. When Sarah opened it, she found exactly what Patricia had described. A journal, leather-bound and filled with Gregory's meticulous handwriting. Reading it made Sarah's blood run cold. Gregory had documented everything: dates, locations, names, descriptions of his victims and what he'd done to them. But more disturbing were the entries about families he'd released, just as he'd told Sarah before he died. 11 families over the years, people he'd held for weeks or months, terrorizing them, then releasing them with explicit threats. "Tell anyone and we'll come back for you. We know where you live. We know where your children go to school. We're always watching." The journal included names, addresses, photographs. Sarah recognized some of them. Families who had filed missing persons reports that were later withdrawn, claiming the family members had simply decided to take an unannounced trip. Cases that had been closed without investigation because the victims themselves insisted nothing had happened. "We need to contact all of them," Sarah told her team. "They need to know it's over, that the men who hurt them are dead or in custody. They need to know they're finally safe." The notifications took weeks. Some of the families had moved, changed their names, tried to disappear. Others broke down in tears when officers arrived at their doors, the relief of finally being free from fear overwhelming them. One family, the Mitchells from Sacramento, had been taken in 1997. They'd spent 3 months in a room similar to the one at Whispering Pines before Gregory abruptly released them, shoving them out of a van on a rural highway with instructions never to speak of what had happened. Mrs. Mitchell, now in her 60s, wept openly when Sarah visited her. "We wanted to report it," she said, "but he had pictures of our grandchildren. He knew where they went to school, what time they got on the bus. We couldn't risk it. For 21 years, we've lived in fear that every knock on the door might be him coming back. He can't hurt you anymore," Sarah assured her. "And you're not responsible for what happened to the other families. You did what you had to do to protect your own." But Sarah could see the guilt in Mrs. Mitchell's eyes, the terrible knowledge that perhaps if they'd reported it, some of the later victims might have been saved. David accompanied Sarah on some of these notifications, his presence a reminder that the Voss brothers' crimes had rippled outward, touching dozens of lives across multiple states. He found an unexpected kinship with these other survivors, people who understood the particular horror of being taken, being controlled, being powerless. Nathan Voss's trial proceeded swiftly. With his full confession and the overwhelming physical evidence, his public defender advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a life sentence without possibility of parole. Nathan accepted, expressing remorse that rang hollow to everyone who had heard him describe his crimes. During the sentencing hearing, David was given the opportunity to speak. He stood before the court, looking at the man who had helped destroy his family. "You talk about being afraid of your brother," David said, his voice steady. "About being weak. But you had 26 years to do the right thing. 26 years to come forward, to save Patricia, to prevent other families from suffering. You chose not to. That wasn't weakness. That was cowardice. That was evil." Nathan looked down at his hands, saying nothing. "My wife and son died believing I would find them," David continued. "They carved messages in the walls, calling for me, trusting I would come, and I did come, but 26 years too late. You stole that time from me. You stole their lives. There's no punishment severe enough for what you've done, but I hope you spend every day of the rest of your life remembering their faces." The judge sentenced Nathan to 11 consecutive life sentences, one for each confirmed murder he'd participated in. He was remanded immediately to the Oregon State Penitentiary, where he would likely die. As David left the courthouse, reporters crowded around him, shouting questions. He ignored them, pushing through until he reached Sarah's car. "It's done," he said quietly, settling into the passenger seat. "Almost," Sarah replied. "There's one more thing." She drove him to the Oregon State Medical Examiner's office, where the remains of Elena and Ben had been processed and prepared for release. Dr. Chen met them in her office, her expression somber. "We've completed our analysis," she said. "I can confirm that the cause of death for both victims was blunt force trauma to the skull, consistent with Nathan Voss's confession. There's no evidence they suffered beyond what we already discussed." It was cold comfort, but David nodded. "Can I take them home now?" "Yes. The funeral home you designated has been contacted. They'll handle the transport." Dr. Chen paused. "Mr. Hartley, I want you to know that your wife and son were fighters. The marks on the walls, the way they tried to escape, they never gave up. That takes incredible strength." "Thank you," David managed. Sarah drove him to the funeral home, where arrangements had been made for a joint service. Elena and Ben would be buried together in a cemetery overlooking the ocean they'd loved, with a headstone that bore both their names and finally, dates of death to accompany their dates of birth. The service was scheduled for the following week, giving time for distant relatives and friends to travel. Sarah promised to attend, and David was grateful. She'd become more than just the detective on his case. She'd become a friend, someone who understood what this journey had cost him. That evening, David returned to his house for the first time since Gregory Voss had held him at gunpoint in Ben's room. The police had processed the scene and cleaned up, but David could still feel the weight of what had happened there. He stood in Ben's doorway, looking at the dinosaur posters and model airplanes, the room frozen in time like a museum exhibit. For 26 years, he'd kept it this way, a shrine to his missing son. It was time to let go. He spent the night carefully packing Ben's belongings, wrapping each toy and book with care. Some things he would donate, others he would keep in storage, memories to be shared with the grandchildren he would never have. Elena's things required the same attention. Her clothes, her books, the small personal items that had filled their home. Each one was a reminder of the life they'd built together, the future they'd planned that had been stolen from them. By dawn, the house looked different. Emptier, but also somehow lighter. David stood in the living room, looking at the spaces where Ben's toys had been, where Elena's reading chair had sat. He picked up the silver-framed photograph of Elena and Ben at the beach, the last picture he'd taken of them together. For 26 years, this photo had been a question mark, a reminder of what he'd lost and didn't understand. Now it was simply a memory, a good memory, untainted by the horror of what came after. Elena smiling in the sunlight, Ben with his gap-toothed grin, a moment of happiness frozen in time. David packed it carefully in a box with other keepsakes. The house would be sold eventually. He couldn't live here anymore, surrounded by ghosts. It was time to begin again. The funeral took place on a clear autumn day, the kind of day Elena had always loved. The cemetery overlooked the Pacific Ocean, waves crashing against distant rocks while seabirds wheeled overhead. A small group gathered around the two caskets. David, his brother who'd flown in from Arizona, Elena's elderly mother, Ben's former teacher, and Sarah with several members of her team. Other families who had lost loved ones to the Voss brothers sent flowers and cards, a community of survivors united by their shared tragedy. The minister spoke about mercy and justice, about the long road to peace. David barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on the caskets, finally able to lay his family to rest after all these years. When it came time for him to speak, David stood and faced the small gathering. Elena loved the ocean, he said, his voice carrying over the coastal wind. She loved the way the light changed on the water, the sound of the waves, the smell of salt air. When we planned that trip in 1992, she was so excited to show Ben all her favorite places along the coast. She wanted him to love it as much as she did. He paused, collecting himself. For 26 years, I imagined them out there somewhere, waiting for me to find them. In a way, I was right. They were waiting. And now I've brought them to this place they loved, where they can finally rest. He looked down at Ben's small casket. My son would be 35 years old now. He'd maybe have a family of his own. He'd have lived a full life, made his own memories, become his own person. That was stolen from him by men who saw him as nothing more than a means to satisfy their twisted desires. David's hands clenched. But I want to remember him as he was that day at the beach, happy, excited, full of life and possibilities. That's who Ben was. That's who he'll always be to me. He sat down, and Elena's mother stood, her voice quavering as she shared memories of her daughter. Then Ben's teacher spoke about the bright, curious boy who had loved dinosaurs and space exploration. When the service concluded, they lowered the caskets into the earth side by side. David stood at the edge of the grave, holding a single white rose Elena had always favored. He dropped it onto her casket, then another onto Ben's. I love you, he whispered. I never stopped loving you. Rest now. You're safe. After the burial, the gathering moved to a small reception at a nearby restaurant. David accepted condolences mechanically, his mind elsewhere. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also somehow lighter than he'd felt in decades. Sarah approached him with a cup of coffee. How are you holding up? I don't know, David admitted. I've spent so long searching, fighting, refusing to accept they were gone. Now that it's over, I don't know what to do with myself. You live, Sarah said simply. You find a way to honor their memory by living the life they can't. That's what survivors do. David nodded slowly. What about you? What happens next for you? More cases, more families who need answers. This work never ends. Sarah looked out the window at the ocean. But this case, your family, it'll stay with me. It already has. The families Gregory released, David said. Have you contacted all of them? Most of them. A few have declined to speak with us, which is their right. But the ones we have reached, they're finally getting the help they need. Therapy, support groups, legal assistance. They're starting to heal. That's something, at least. Sarah hesitated, then said, There's one more thing you should know. We found evidence in Gregory's journal that he was planning to take another family. He had surveillance photos of a mother and daughter in Portland, detailed notes about their routines. If you hadn't kept pushing, if this case hadn't broken when it did, they would have been next. David closed his eyes. So Elena and Ben being found, it saved someone. It saved 2 people, maybe more. Gregory wouldn't have stopped. He couldn't stop. Your persistence, your refusal to let the case die, it ended this before he could hurt anyone else. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the ocean through the restaurant window. What will you do now? Sarah asked. I'm selling the house. Too many memories, too many ghosts. I'm thinking about moving somewhere new, starting fresh. Maybe volunteer work with missing persons organizations, helping other families navigate what I went through. That would be good, Sarah said. Your experience could help a lot of people. The reception wound down as afternoon faded to evening. David said his goodbyes, accepting hugs and handshakes from people who had shared his journey. When he finally left, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. He drove back to the cemetery alone, parking near the fresh graves. The flowers from the service were still arranged around the headstone, bright splashes of color against the dark earth. David sat on a bench nearby, watching as the light faded. He'd brought a small bag with him, containing items he'd chosen carefully. From the bag, he pulled out Ben's favorite dinosaur, the green T-Rex they'd found in the concealed room at Whispering Pines. He'd asked for it back after forensics finished processing it, and they'd agreed. He placed it gently on Ben's grave. Next, he pulled out Elena's lighthouse necklace, cleaned and polished. He draped it over her headstone. Finally, he removed the silver-framed photograph, the one of Elena and Ben at Cannon Beach. He'd had it encased in weatherproof glass and mounted on a small stake. He positioned it between their graves so they would always be together, always smiling, always frozen in that perfect moment before everything went wrong. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, David said quietly. I'm sorry I couldn't find you in time. But you're home now. You're finally home. He sat until full darkness fell, the stars emerging overhead and the sound of the ocean filling the quiet. Then he stood, touched the headstone one last time, and walked back to his car. Behind him, the graves lay peaceful in the starlight, marked by love and memory and the promise that they would never be forgotten. 3 months later, David stood in the lobby of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Virginia. He'd been hired as a consultant, using his experience to help other families navigate the nightmare of having a loved one disappear. His first case was a 6-year-old boy who had vanished from a park in Maryland 2 weeks earlier. David sat with the parents, seeing his own anguish reflected in their faces, and told them what he wished someone had told him 26 years ago. Don't give up. Don't stop searching. Don't let anyone tell you it's hopeless. Stay visible. Keep their names in the public eye. And remember that no matter how long it takes, the truth is out there waiting to be found. The mother gripped his hand. Did you find your family? Yes, David said. It took 26 years. But I found them, and I brought them home. He couldn't promise these parents the same outcome. Statistics were grim for children who remained missing after the first 48 hours, but he could give them hope, could share the strategies that had kept Elena and Ben's case alive for more than 2 decades. In his office, David kept 3 photographs. One of Elena and Ben at the beach, one of their headstone overlooking the ocean, and one of Patricia Voss, who had survived 20 years of captivity and was now slowly rebuilding her life with the help of intensive therapy and support. Patricia had reached out to him a month after the funeral, wanting to meet. They'd sat in a coffee shop, 2 survivors of Gregory Voss's evil, and talked for hours. "I'm sorry," Patricia had said. "I'm sorry he took your family. I'm sorry I couldn't stop him." "You were a victim too," David had replied. "You have nothing to apologize for." They'd stayed in touch, comparing notes on their respective healing processes. Patricia was writing a book about her experience, hoping to help other survivors of long-term captivity. David had agreed to write the foreword. Now, sitting in his office, David checked his email and found a message from Sarah. She was working on a new cold case, a family that had disappeared in Idaho in 1989. She wanted his input on search strategies and media outreach. David smiled slightly and began typing a response. This was his life now, helping others find what he had lost, using his pain to prevent or resolve the pain of others. It wasn't the life he'd planned. It wasn't the life he'd wanted. But it was meaningful, purposeful, and in its own way. It honored Elena and Ben's memory. That evening, he called his brother in Arizona. "How are you doing?" Michael asked. "Better," David said honestly. "I'm actually better." "I'm glad. We were worried about you for a while there." "I was worried about me too," David admitted. "But I think I've found something worth doing. Something that gives all of this meaning. Elena would be proud of you." David looked at the photograph of his wife and son, their smiles frozen in eternal summer. "I hope so. I really hope so." After he hung up, David went to his apartment window and looked out at the Virginia skyline. Somewhere out there were families who didn't know where their loved ones were, who were living the same nightmare he'd endured for 26 years. But now, because of everything he'd learned, because of the justice that had finally been served, he could help them. He could be the voice that refused to let cases go cold, that insisted on answers, that never stopped searching. It was Elena and Ben's legacy, forged in tragedy but tempered by love. And David Hartley intended to honor that legacy for whatever time he had left. 5 years later, Sarah Kovac stood in the parking lot of what used to be the Whispering Pines rest area. The old structure had been demolished years ago, replaced by a modern facility with solar panels and electric vehicle charging stations. A small memorial plaque had been installed near the entrance, dedicated to the victims of Gregory and Nathan Voss. She touched the plaque gently, reading the names engraved there. 14 confirmed victims, their lives commemorated in bronze and stone. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "How does it look?" She took a photo of the memorial and sent it back. "Beautiful. They'd approve." Sarah had risen to lead Oregon's cold case unit, overseeing investigations into dozens of unsolved disappearances. The Hartley case had taught her that no case was ever truly hopeless, that evidence could surface decades after a crime, that families deserved answers no matter how much time had passed. She'd solved 8 cold cases in the past 5 years, bringing closure to families who had lived with uncertainty for years or decades. Each success felt like honoring Elena and Ben Hartley's memory. Patricia Voss had published her book, 20 Years in Darkness, A Survivor's Story, which became a bestseller and resource for trauma counselors working with long-term captivity victims. She'd used the proceeds to establish a foundation supporting survivors of kidnapping and extended abuse. Sarah had attended Patricia's book launch, watching as the woman who'd spent 2 decades in a basement stood before hundreds of people and told her story with strength and grace. It was a kind of victory, however hard-won. Nathan Voss had died in prison 3 years into his sentence, a heart attack that the medical examiner ruled natural causes. Few mourned his passing. The 11 families Gregory had released and terrorized into silence had each pursued their own paths to healing, Some had testified at Nathan's trial, finding catharsis in speaking their truth publicly. Others had chosen privacy, working through their trauma away from public scrutiny. All of them had been relieved to learn their tormentors were dead or imprisoned, that the threat hanging over them for decades had finally been lifted. Sarah's phone rang. It was David. "I'm at the cemetery," he said. "Thought you'd want to know." "How are they?" "Peaceful. The ocean was rough today. Elena would have loved it." David visited the graves every few months, making the trip from Virginia to Oregon to spend time with his family. He'd never remarried, though he'd dated occasionally. Some loves, he'd told Sarah, were too big to replace. His work with missing persons organizations had saved lives. 3 families had been reunited directly because of strategies David had helped develop. Countless others had benefited from the support networks and resources he'd helped establish. He'd written his own book, Never Stop Searching, One Father's 26-Year Journey, which had become required reading in law enforcement circles for anyone working missing persons cases. "I've been thinking about something," David said, "about the text message I received that day. I know what happened. We never figured out who sent it." Sarah frowned. They'd traced the burner phone to a dead end, and with Nathan and Gregory both accounted for, the sender's identity had remained a mystery. "Do you think it matters now?" she asked. "Maybe not, but I've always wondered if it was someone else who knew about their crimes, another victim who escaped, or someone who suspected but never came forward, someone who wanted to help but was too afraid." "It's possible," Sarah admitted. "We may never know." "I suppose some mysteries don't get solved," David said. "I've learned to live with that." They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. Sarah returned to her car and drove back to Salem, thinking about the case that had consumed 2 years of her life and changed her career trajectory. In her office, she pulled out the Hartley case file, now officially closed but still occupying a prominent place on her shelf. She'd solved more high-profile cases since then, but this one would always be special. Her email pinged with a message from the FBI. They'd found a burial site in Nevada that matched the pattern of the Voss brothers' crimes. Could she consult on the investigation? Sarah replied immediately, "Of course, send me the case details." The work continued. It would always continue. As long as people went missing, as long as families needed answers, there would be cases to solve and justice to pursue. Sarah thought about David standing at the Ocean View Cemetery, talking to the wife and son who couldn't answer back, but who he'd never stopped loving. She thought about Patricia Voss, who'd survived hell and come out the other side strong enough to help others. She thought about the families who'd gotten closure, and the ones still waiting for answers. And she thought about the words David had spoken at Elena and Ben's funeral, words that had become her own personal mission statement. The truth is out there waiting to be found. Sarah Kovac intended to keep finding it, one case at a time, for however long it took. Outside her window, the Oregon sky was clear and bright, full of promise and possibility. She opened the Nevada file and began to read.